Hello, you're on the road less traveled with Gary L. and Gigi's Boo on reallibertymedia.com. 7 p.m. on the 3rd of September, 2017. Hello, Gigi's Boo.
Hi, how is everybody?
Yeah, how is everybody out there in Real Liberty Media land? And if you're listening to us live, there's a chat room over here. We have a whole bunch of people in the chat room. And if you're not listening live, if you're listening to an archive, well, maybe you ought to consider going to reallibertymedia.com and checking out the live chat applet that is pretty much occupied 24/7 by some of these good people who have been here for years and years and years. So with that kind of background, one should infer from that it's a good place to be, and I highly recommend it. Don't you think so, Gigi's Boo?
I think so. I think this is a great place to be.
It is. You got some great people out there like Grimner, who is the guy in charge. He's the guy in charge of this popsicle stand. And you got Kate and Alias and Asmo and Beth Z and Bitcoin Bob and Chalcedony and Chloe and Free Enslaved and IB Don C and Java Doctor. And JJ is showing up in the chat room, has his own show here. Wanna Taco, Maestro Brow, North Force, Rain, Rob Works, Tip Bob, Trust No One, Vinny, Beetle, Behind the Woodshed, who just had his show at between 3 and 5 today and every Sunday, and you really need to tune into that. Ben Chicken, I guess Osama got taken out of the name, Dima, Frumpy, there's Gigi's Boo in the chat room, Goober, Zilla, Jehovah, Kozu, Nelson Dubois, always do it, Poxified, Pawn Saw, Sock Puppet, Hey Sock, and The Phantom. Look at that crowd. What do you, man?
We got a crowd tonight.
Yeah, look at that crowd in here. That's a good thing, especially on a holiday weekend. How many people forgot that it was a holiday weekend besides me?
I knew it, but it doesn't. Holidays are every day to me.
Every day's a holiday. That's what I tell people.
Exactly right.
Yeah, and every meal's a feast. At least that's what they told us.
I kind of agree with that. There's too many hungry people in the world.
Yeah, that's true. And it wouldn't take a whole lot to push a whole lot of us over into that demographic, would it?
Not much.
Uh-oh. Grimner says, yeah, they've been here for years and years. They lost their map and can't find their way home. Oh,
yeah.
No. Oh, no.
Yeah. I kind of, I like, Thanksgiving. And I like most all holidays, but Labor Day's never really been my cup of tea. I mean, just never did make any sense to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. It's like, it is one of those holidays that kind of, you wonder what it's all about.
I mean, why honor Labor Day? Everybody labors. Why do you want to honor it? Not everybody that works gets Labor Day off.
Right.
So, why do that?
If you were a Marxist communist, you'd say, oh, Labor Day is the best holiday next to May Day when you march around the maypole with the red flags.
Yeah, well.
Look, Antifa, but we'll talk more about that later. Anyway, what else is new, Gigi's Boo?
Well, Atticus has learned to open the gate to jailbreak all the dogs. You know that. We couldn't figure out. Tell it. We could not. It sounded like a herd of horses because we've got several dogs, and boy, he's into everything anyway, and he's got all the cops love him, and they come by and whoop whoop at him and the whole 9 yards. But we couldn't figure out how all the dogs were getting together. And if you get them all together, there's about 6. And we'd send the ones that lived next door home and shut the gate and do the whole 9 yards. And so they'd be back over. And we looked the fence to make sure there was nothing loose or they had dug under it. So we put them back and we just went to the window and watched. And he ran over to the gate stood up on a little block, and he took his nose and flipped the gate lock up, kicked the gate open, and they all ran. And I said, oh, well, yeah. That he's jailbroke. And so we had to fix it. We had to put a little lock in it, and we just let him alone. He didn't know we did it. He went over there and he tried to open it, and he looked back at the house, and he was so mad. He began to kick dirt, and he was really mad, just jumped around like, I'm sorry, guys, just give me a chance to figure this one out, and I will jailbreak you again. But he can't get the latch off. He's a hot mess.
Lord have mercy. I'm not sure what to think about that. Oh, well, anyway, let's see what else we have going on, Gigi's Boo, other than the fact that you broke your toe. Or did you not want me to say anything?
It's not the toe, it's the foot. I've got a broke foot. And that's a real buncher, because I can't do anything but walk on my heel. And over the holidays, I was at the hospital with my mother, and they said, oh, you need to see an orthopedic surgeon, blah, blah, blah. Nuh-uh. I said, Boo ain't seeing nobody. I'm going home, and I'll see my bone doctor when he comes back in. But being over the holidays, I've got to suffer a little bit till I can.
Yeah. We're just a big hot mess. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, there were some hot goings on this week here locally, and where you really can make a difference, the local thing. And as many of you already know, I made the trip to Charlottesville for the hearing on Friday, and we'll talk more about that later. But it was kind of interesting. A whole lot of information kind of flowed from that. But a whole lot of observational stuff too, and which sometimes is just as important as what technically goes on. But yeah, we'll talk more about that as we go along. But let's touch on some things. So I don't want to get too wrapped around the axle about all that, because it is an ongoing process. And there are some observations that certainly can be made, and I will make. But before we do all that, let's talk about some other stuff that's going on, Gigi's Boo. How about a class action lawsuit against Monsanto? Yeah, that's not news. Apparently, they've become more frequent than ever. American farmers, actually, they're suing as a result of losing millions of acres of crops. And this article is in Natural Blaze, pretty good source. And I'll drop all this in the chat room. There again, if you're not in the chat room, you have to wait to see all this in the blogcaster, and sometimes that takes a few hours. So if you're not in the chat room, getting us live, you probably ought to consider being so. But Natural Blaze reports that a growing amount of anger and outrage against Monsanto has culminated in a number of class action lawsuits being filed. Now, at issue presently are the devastating effects of dicamba, or dicamba, it's probably dicamba, a potent herbicide formulated for genetically modified seeds. And the product just coincidentally has a tendency to drift onto neighboring crops after being applied to GMO crops, and thereby destroying millions of acres of productive farmland. I think we talked about this already, but I did want to touch on it again because Hal brought up in his show today that there need to be remedies in place for people rather than trying to take on a huge multinational, international corporation with deep pockets that could probably hold out against you for 1,000 years, just by legal wranglings that cost a lot of money. But at any rate, the complaints of dicamba are growing in 21 states And there have been thousands of complaints just in Arkansas, which, by the way, prompted a state ban on the use of dicamba. Well. So, wonder how that's going to play out. I'm sure Monsanto will have something to say about that. Already some 3 million acres of farmland has been impacted by the misuse of dicamba. They say misuse, but how would it be possible to properly use it and not allow it to drift over to adjacent properties? I mean, how could that be done, Gigi's Boo? Do you have any idea?
No, I don't, Gary.
I don't either, because, I mean,
I really don't.
You can't control when the wind blows, and if you're a farmer, you can't just sit around and wait for a windless day. This herbicide is intended to prevent the spread of weeds by having farmers, of course, use the GMO dicamba-resistant seeds, which, of course, you have to buy every year, in addition to the dicamba, I might say. What a scam. Oh, man. And the article goes on and on, talks about people on Twitter raising Cain about it, and Reuters actually produced a video that covered the damages of it. So it's another wrinkle, and guess what? It wasn't glyphosate. It wasn't Roundup. It's something else. Ooh, imagine that. But the common denominator, of course, is glyphosate. I'm sorry, it's Monsanto. Okay. Now, did I say glyphosate? But Paris defies the European Union Commission and vows to block glyphosate reauthorization. Do we see another crack in the block of the EU? And this reported by the Sustainable Pulse, August 30th, that France will vote against a proposal by the European Commission to renew the license for glyphosate, the active ingredient in weed killers that we all know that. It says, quote, France will vote against the reauthorization of glyphosate for 10 years, given the uncertainties that persist with regard to its dangerousness. And that came from the minister in the Ecology and Sustainable Development Ministry. Wow. I mean, that's a mouthful. France could block obtaining the qualified majority of EU member states needed to renew the license. So now the plot really thickens, doesn't it? They could keep the EU at large from renewing the license. You don't think that's going to be a shot heard around the world? And this article just goes into the details, gives the background, all that good stuff, and highly recommended if you're interested in this sort of thing. And I'm not sure why you wouldn't be, because they're trying to kill you. If you hadn't already come to that realization, they're trying to kill you. And all this is that these little battles popping up, and this is the trench warfare that's going on right now, while most of the rest of us just sit around and celebrate holidays. Huh? Any thoughts on that, Gigi's Boo?
Yeah, we just sit here and eat and drink and be merry. And people don't really, 90% of the people in this country do not think what goes into their body. As long as it tastes good, it's going in.
Yeah, they have a handle on that too. They know how to make things taste good artificially, don't they? Yeah, they can make cyanide taste really good. What poison is it that smells like pecans or something?
That's arsenic.
Arsenic, yeah. Oh, yeah. It's good for you. Kind of like thimerosal and kind of like aluminum and all those things that are good for you. Now, we talked about...
That's right.
Okay. Yeah, we haven't so much, but others have talked about the fact that there may be a linkage between gut flora and autism. Have you heard any of those or read any of those, Gigi's Boo?
No, I haven't. I've always heard that autism is connected with the vaccinations.
Yeah, there's that. But
I've not heard about gut flora.
Yeah. I've also been reading some of those studies that suggest that the condition of your gut flora may have some impact on the development of autism, and that is apparently been related back to, guess what? Glyphosate and some of this GMO business. But then there's another study out of Science News that suggests that gut bacteria may affect anxiety. Now, have you noticed, though, if you think about it on balance, how over the years people have become, they've become a lot more reactive. I don't know what the right word is. And there's a lot more depression. There's a lot more of all this going on. Have you noticed that, Gigi?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, how much of that might just actually have to do with what we've been talking about our diets. And this study suggests that the tiny molecules could be key to microbes' long-distance effect on the brain. And there again, that's kind of, in a sense, associated with the concept of having an impact on autism as well, isn't it? But the article goes to say that tiny molecules in the brain may help gut bacteria hijack people's emotions. Bacteria living in the human gut have a strange influence over mood, depression, and a whole lot of other things. But it's been unclear exactly how these bacteria exercise remote control on the brain. But now they've done research in rodents anyway, and the research has suggested that gut microbes may alter the inventory of microRNAs, and those are the molecules that help keep cells working by managing protein production and so forth. Mounting evidence indicates that the way we think and feel might be able to be controlled by our gut microbiota. For instance, the presence or absence of gut bacteria can influence whether a mouse exhibits anxiety-like behaviors, such as avoiding bright lights or open spaces. Do you have any thoughts so far, Gigi's Boo? I think maybe you might.
Well, I could go and talk about this forever, but I have a little niece who was born a preemie, and she has an autistic spectrum. And if we feed her certain foods, we find out that she does better. So the flora and everything is showing up in mice. Heck, I mean, what is going to happen? I've said all along, they knocking us off. They're knocking us off a little bit by a little bit. I don't know, Gary.
Yeah. But I think this is really important to note, because there again, I can't reasonably believe that someone hasn't already riddled this out in advance.
It was riddled out in advance. I
mean, how could you not understand, if you have a keen understanding of the systemic nature of the human organism, how could you not at least strongly suspect that something like this could have an impact?
That's true. How could you not? But you got to remember what we've said, the dumbing down of America. They're teaching them not to think for themselves, mm-hmm. not to search things out, and think. They're just, I don't know, people just blindly follow. Mm-hmm. That's just astounding to me.
Yeah. But, and I will have to say in this article, rather than discuss the concepts of glyphosate and GMO and all this stuff, they bottom line this by saying the team wants to see if probiotic drugs can cultivate certain types of bacteria in the gut and therefore fine-tune microRNA levels in specific parts of the brain. If scientists can adjust microRNA abundances in a way that assuages anxiety, it could help lead to the development of new medications for psychiatric and neurological disorders. Well, guess what? We're not going to worry about the problem. We're going to enrich the pharmaceutical industry yet again to manage a problem. We're not going. Do you see where I'm going with that, Gigi Spoon?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. How neat is that? We're just not going to talk about glyphosate, and we're really not going to talk about GMO and all the bizarre proteins that are created inadvertently, end quote. No, we're going to talk about what new drugs we can come up with. It's kind of like the concept of cancer management. Nobody talks about a cure. They talk about management. Anyway,
cancer's a moneymaker.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely is. So I thought you folks might actually enjoy that article because, like many pieces of propaganda, it tells you enough truth to steer you in the direction of supporting a remedy that isn't addressing the cause. It's addressing the control. How interesting that we do that to ourselves, or we allow it to be done. Monsanto, and we've talked about this, and I think Hal talked about it, but this whole, I've lost it, CRISPR technology, the new GMO technology. Monsanto teams up with Harvard, MIT to unleash new unregulated GMOs on unsuspecting customers. And this article is an old article. It is actually from a year ago. But how many of us heard about this when it came on? The bad press and constant protest, both in its home country in the United States and especially abroad where GMOs are banned in 38 countries, have continued since the whole crisis began back in 2013. There's what they call a crisis. And it leads to company plans to possibly change its name and culminating with a pending agreed-upon sale to Bayer this year. Well, as far as I know, that's still underway. And actually, I believe that's under a great deal of inspection right now in the EU. I think there's a whole lot of resistance to the idea of Monsanto and Bayer becoming one operation, but we'll see how that works out. But anyway, this article goes on to talk about how they teamed up with Harvard and MIT to develop the CRISPR GMO technology. It's basically called gene editing. I think we actually did talk about this maybe last time, but there again, it's worth talking about again because there's follow-on to this. It's talking about gene editing, which basically allows scientists just to exchange a couple of codes. Okay. And they can pull one out and replace it with something that they believe is more beneficial and has a specific purpose. And this whole push allows scientists and companies to begin experimenting with changing genes in our natural food crops. Did you hear that? We're not talking about developing a particular genetically modified organism per se. We're talking about taking a natural food crop and editing a gene or two. How interesting is that?
And they're changing a gene or two. Why don't you say the whole thing?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's kind of like, I'm not sure what kind of type of comparison to draw here, but it's not like you can just take an organism and change one gene for a specific purpose and not, in all probability, cause a cascading effect across the entire organism. Does that make any sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Well, the Green Party, or the European Free Alliance Group in the European Parliament, had to say that CRISPR technology basically talks about gene editing that raises similar concerns as genetic modification. So they're really not seeing a big distinction here as regards to intellectual property rights and the impact on traditional and organic farming models. It was only last week that researchers wrote in the journal Science, and they expressed grave concerns about one particular use of gene editing, the gene drive, while the European Food Safety Authority concluded in 2012 that cisgenesis, another technology for altering plants, should be treated in terms of regulation and oversight as a GM technology. So the flavor of this article is that this whole CRISPR business is an attempt to do an end run around the classification as being a GMO. So, yeah, keep your eyes open for that, because that's a pretty interesting approach. And you know, these guys are always up to something, aren't they, Gigi's Boo? They
sure are. All the time.
Yeah, always up to something. But guess what else? Related article. And this is from the 27th of July of this year, that a team of U.S. researchers for the first time ever edited human embryo DNA. And guess who talked about this? MIT. MIT Tech Review revealed this, that Oregon Health and Science University scientists changed the DNA of single-celled human embryos using a gene editing technique called, guess what? CRISPR. It's a proof of principle that it can work, an anonymous scientist familiar with the project told MIT. They significantly reduced mosaicism, a state where an embryo has two different types of cells with different genetic sequences. The source said, I don't think it's the start of clinical trials yet, but it does take it further than anyone has before. So, like I said, keep an eye on this. This is stuff that's going on essentially in the background that is kind of glossed over because of other things going on. It also goes on to say that none of the embryos were allowed to develop for more than a few days, and researchers claim they never had intention of implanting them into a womb. If such a genetically modified child were born, they would pass on the edited changes in their DNA to subsequent generations. Say that again. If they were born, they would pass on the changes in their DNA to subsequent generations. Transhumanism. Okay. Along a similar line, let's talk about artificial intelligence. Some people think that is overblown, is an overblown thing. Perhaps, but there's a whole lot of money being spent on it, which doesn't necessarily mean anything. But nonetheless, the money is being spent, and we're going to talk about 6 disturbing predictions about how AI will transform life on Earth by 2050. Bear in mind, this could be public notice. And let's see what they say here. In his new book, It's Alive, Artificial Intelligence from the Logic Piano and Killer Robots, Professor Toby Walsh paints a horrifying picture of life in 2050. By 2050, the year 2000 will look quaintly old-fashioned as the horse-drawn era of 1900 did to people in 1950. Here are some of his most bone-chilling predictions about life in 2050. Humans will be banned from driving. I think Hal's talked about it on his show. Anyway, work is already underway to build cars that can drive themselves. But by 2050, Professor Walsh predicts that humans will be banned from driving altogether. Will be banned from driving cars. As self-driving cars become more ubiquitous, most people will lose their driving skills and street parking will disappear. A big image just popped in my mind of some big, slouchy, obese teenager laying up in a very heavily cushioned couch with an iPod or an iPad in front of them and never moving other than to eat. That's the image that just popped into my mind, whether rightfully or not. Eventually, ships... Go ahead.
That's a very scary thing to think of that.
Yeah. Eventually, ships, planes, and trains will become autonomous, allowing goods to be transported all over the world without human intervention. Professor Walsh says, if we can take the human out of the loop, we can make our roads much safer. I want you to think about that for a second. I want you to think about it in terms of making people obsolete. And how that idea under global corporate governance might lead to a drastic reduction in the human population, or the necessity thereof. Of course, as you know, one way to solve an economic problem is to reduce the number of services that are required. And how do you do that? You reduce the number of people who require the services, right? Just something to think about. Number 2, your boss will be a computer. Oh my. How do you like that idea, Gigi's Boo?
Oh, that'd be pretty good, because all I'd do is just take a hammer to it.
I don't know. Remember now, they have their ways. We have our ways. As computers become more intelligent, AI systems will increasingly manage how you work, from scheduling your tasks and approving holidays to monitoring and rewarding your performance. You're a good little carbon unit. Here is a Twizzler. Have a Twizzler. They could even be put in charge of hiring and firing employees. Oh, guess what? Wait a minute. What was that? What's that? That law that allegedly made all your medical stuff confidential. What was that? Gigi's Boo. What was it? HIPAA laws, which actually makes it generally available to anyone and everyone who can show a need, such as insurance companies and such as employers. And what about this gene business? Everybody wants to have their genome typed and all that good stuff. Well, guess what? When you do that, that information becomes available.
They're going to clone us with machines, too.
That, too. That's part of the transhumanist agenda I was talking about while you were away. They could even be I said that. And looking at qualifications and skill sets to match people with jobs. Oh, no. You are good at math, but you hate math, but you're going to have to do math or you can't have a job. Professor Walsh points out that matching people with jobs is no more complicated than matching people with each other, something that we already rely on dating sites to do for us. Uh-oh. How many of us would have guessed that signing up on a dating site was beta testing for this whole new brave world? Wow. However, he does admit there are some decisions that machines should not be allowed to make. We will have to learn to say when to say to computers, sorry, I can't let you do that. Oh, did he not just suggest that we're in a subservient position at that point? Sorry, I can't let you do that. Now, what if the computer says, sorry, screw you, we'll go do it anyway? Then what? Number 3, a robot will have taken over your job. I think a lot of people have already experienced that, especially in the automobile industry. I think we've seen that happen. And number 4, you will live most of your life in a virtual world. There again, I see that big heavy-set kid laying up on the very soft cushion with the VR glasses on, Why does this sound like The Matrix? How? I thought The Matrix was a movie. Guess not. Wars, here's an interesting one. Wars will be fought in cyberspace. Oh, you sank my battleship. Governments already rely heavily on hacking and cyber surveillance to gather intelligence about foreign enemies, but they will increasingly use these tools to carry out attacks, kind of like attacking your electrical grid or attacking a nuclear power station. What do you think about that? Banks will have no choice, of course, but to invest more and more in sophisticated artificial intelligence systems to defend themselves from attack. Let's just skip all the rest of them. Let people read them themselves. This is a pretty hair-raising article, actually. So highly recommended from MSN Money. So there's your official notice, huh? Okay, 20 minutes still, Gigi's Boo. You have any ideas on any of that so far?
It's mind-boggling to me, but I've been saying all along they're going to weed out the human race. Mm-hmm. That's part of the course. I was thinking about, when you were talking about no need for humans, there was an episode on the Twilight Zone that had Burgess Meredith in it. Mm-hmm. And he was a librarian. Mm-hmm. And he was brought before, they called it a council. And he talked to him about his job. And the man said, librarians are obsolete. Books are obsolete. So you're going to be done away with. Mercy killing. So he chose the time and place at his apartment and to be blown up. And it was really funny because he was sitting there reading his Bible and the man came to gloat about him being put to death. And so he told him, he said, well, you're in the room and nobody can unlock the door. So you're going to die with me. The man went crazy. And just about the time it was to blow up, he got away. The door opened and he got away. Burgess Meredith was blown up. And the next person that went before the council was the man that tried Burgess Meredith. It's an endless cycle. So we're going to have that. We're going to have those things. That's coming. That's coming. The world is too populated now.
Yeah. Yeah. And as we talked about, I think 2 weeks ago, I can show you evidence that at least someone is in possession of information that directly suggests that the worldwide population is going to be drastically reduced. Okay. So if you missed that, you need to go back to the blogcaster and dig it out because the links are in there for that information. Well, what about all this wireless radiation? We're hearing about this more and more, about smart meters and this new technology. I forget the name of it. I don't know, the new cell technology. And you always kind of wonder about things. And if you want to look at a good source of, or maybe a predictor of the future, look at your actuaries, your underwriters, your insurance people. They usually are pretty doggone accurate in their predictions on how many people out of it. They don't know who's going to die, but they can tell you in aggregate numbers of people who will die or who will get sick. And what are the odds? They're like odds makers, so to speak, and that's what insurance rates are based on, effectively. But what about when a company denies coverage? That speaks volumes. That tells me, when I see something like that they know that the risk is so great that it would be a financial liability for an insurance company to offer protection against a particular thing. Well, that's what Lloyd's of London, if you really want to go to the horse's mouth, there it is. Lloyd's of London has excluded liability coverage for harm from RF and EMF wireless radiation. Lloyd's of London excludes any liability coverage for claims that are directly or indirectly arising from, resulting from, or contributed to by electromagnetic fields, electromagnetic radiation, electromagnetism, and radio waves or noise. And that's from the CFC Underwriting Limited, which is a Lloyd's of London underwriter. Pages 12 and 13 of policy document, page 1314 of the PDF, and was posted by Citizens for Safe Technology. This is a recent renewal, which as of February 7th, 2015, we're 2 years behind the power curve on this one, excludes any coverage associated with exposure to non-ionizing radiation, as opposed to ionizing radiation. And if you don't know the distinction of those two things, I recommend you look it up. In response to clarification, this response was received on February 18th from the CFC Underwriting Limited London, UK agent for Lloyd's. Their response is, the exclusion 32, is a general insurance exclusion and is applied across the market as standard. The purpose of the exclusion is to exclude coverage for illnesses caused by continuous long-term non-ionizing radiation exposure, such as that through mobile phone usage. Watch out. As you sit around with that cell phone in your face every waking moment, and eventually, as people start to become sick and die from the effects of that, your insurance is not going to pay. Bear in mind, it's right there. Right there in your face. And like I said, 2 years behind the power curve on this story. Okay, last thing before we go spend the last part talking about Charlottesville. Like I say, I really don't want to get too much into the trivium of that, other than to hit a couple of high spots. But before we do that, Jesus Bill, we talk about, how vinegar is such a great product and it can be used for so many things, especially for cleaning and all that sort of thing, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And I found this and I thought it was important to bring it out because there are some exceptions to that. There's 6 times in this article that lists 6 times you should never use vinegar when cleaning. And we'll just quickly go over that. It says, never use vinegar on your computer monitor or smartphone. Oh, speaking of which, so never try to clean the screens with vinegar. It will mess them up. It says instead use a microfiber cloth. Okay, that's how you do that. Never ever mix vinegar with bleach. Now we know, most of us know not to mix ammonia and bleach, right? But don't mix vinegar and bleach either. It creates chlorine gas, and it will do you in. Never clean your pearls with vinegar, Gigi's boo.
I knew that you don't clean pearls. Do you know how you clean them?
Well, let's see. Let's see if they
No, don't look it up.
No, they don't say.
I ask you a question.
How? No, I don't.
The only way you can clean pearls is to put them on your neck and to wear them. Pearls are a living stone. Mm-hmm. And as long as you wear them and they get the moisture and the oil off of you, then they live.
There you go. But vinegar will actually dissolve pearls. So you really don't want to do that. Never use vinegar. Now this is a good one. And listen up. Never use vinegar on marble or granite countertops. Similar to the acid in vinegar dissolving your pearls, you run the risk of etching the tops because the acid will eat away at the surface and leave a dull or discolored spot behind. So don't put vinegar on your marble or granite countertops. Instead, just use a damp towel and clean. That's it. If you want to, you can take a little bit of dish soap and a little bit of rubbing alcohol and mix it in with 20 parts water and make a nice cleaner. But again, don't use vinegar. And along with that, never use vinegar to clean your stone or ceramic floor. And there again, vinegar or lemon juice will etch your stone or ceramic floor. So don't do it. And don't use vinegar on an egg stain. This one I thought was kind of odd, but since eggs have protein enzymes, adding vinegar to egg stains on clothing or on your car could cause them to coagulate. Okay. So be careful not to do that. The best bet would be to use soap and warm water so you don't run into a problem with that. So anyway, and also at the bottom of this is another article, and gives you a recipe how to make a vinegar cleaner, and also it includes orange peel, stuff like that. Makes it smell good, so that's something to keep in mind. Okay, there's that one. Okay, Gigi's Boo, let's close. We got about 10 minutes. You have any comments on that?
I still like vinegar.
Oh, I like it too. Just there's certain things you don't do with it. And that happens to be it. Okay. Thanks to Grimner for providing me with the necessary press pass to use this past Friday at the Charlottesville. There we go. At the Charlottesville City Circuit Court, because they had a hearing with respect to the statue removal thing and the parks renaming and all this crap that ultimately resulted in a whole bunch of hoorah, death and injuries several weekends back. And it's an ongoing thing, ongoing business. And it's a little bit, it's infuriating on the one hand because the mainstream media is essentially ignoring the core issue, and the core issue being that there's every indication that the city council is acting under color of authority in the attempt to both remove these statues, one of Robert E. Lee and one of Stonewall Jackson, and also rename the parks in which they are situated. And it's a highly contentious issue. And I had the opportunity to go up there Sunday for the hearing on what's called a demurrer. In other words, let's give you a little background. Way back at the first of the year, an organization filed suit against the city, basically saying that they did not have the authority to remove the statues and rename the parks and all this stuff. And as a result, the city responded with, well, they basically take exception, and it's called a demurrer. So they respond with a legal document they list all the reasons why the plaintiffs were wrong and why the city can do what they want to do. So this hearing was to examine this demurrer, and it started at 1:30 in the afternoon and didn't end until 5:30. That's how big a deal this is. I mean, this is a very important action, and it was fun in a way. Grimner provided me the Real Liberty Media Reporter Press Pass, which it garnered a lot of interest, even among the local mainstream media affiliates. Some of those guys, oh, who are you? So I told them, I said, oh yeah, well, and I told them all about it. And even some of the deputies wanted to know, oh, what's this about? And so, they all got some information. They were all referred to reallibertymedia.com and to this show. And if any are listening, and a fellow by the name of Zach, really nice guy I got to meet. He's a photographer for the local newspaper there. And he was very, very interested in all of this. And so we had some good conversations, and I actually had some conversation with some of the plaintiffs and with some of the other side, although I have to tell you, the folk that, how a courtroom is arranged, you have one group sits on one side, one group sits on the other. And I sat in the back just watching all this, and it was fascinating to see the generational split on either side of the courtroom. On the side of the plaintiffs, the people who filed the original action against the city, you had older war veteran types and just an older set of people. And on the left side, there were younger, clearly more, and I hate to use the words liberal and conservative because those really don't mean anything to me. but some people would characterize them as ultra-liberal folks sitting on the left, coincidentally. So it was an interesting split in the courtroom, and the judge actually opened, and I was rather impressed with the circuit court judge. He's an older gentleman. He was very pleasant, had a sense of humor, but he's very serious. He was paid extremely close attention to both sides, and it was clear that he was doing everything he could do to make sure that he was ultimately going to give a balanced hearing, a balanced result to this whole thing. And of course, in the background is that no matter how he decides, this will be appealed to the Supreme Court, state Supreme Court. So I'm sure that has an impact as well, because no judge likes to have his cases appealed. And you want to make sure you have everything, all the I's dotted and T's crossed and all that kind of stuff. But other than that, he was a very impressive guy. He talked about the fact that it was a pre-trial motion hearing. It's not the trial. The trial will come later, and we'll be there for that too. But this was just to address the exceptions that the city took against the plaintiff's actions. He said that they had received thousands of phone calls and emails regarding this case, the majority of which were from out-of-state entities. And he basically said that the law didn't work that way. It wasn't a popularity contest, and he was correct. And I was actually quite impressed with that. The fact that it is when you talk about the Republican form of government, it is the law, and the law works based on the law, not based on public opinion. So I actually considered all of that counterproductive, because it tied up all his clerk's time and trying to answer all these emails, and effectively it was just out of hand. So he did a good job of explaining the system, how the system worked, that it is a system of law, not of people. And he appealed to everyone to show some level of civility throughout. And fortunately, everyone did do that. I don't want to go through all the 4 pages of notes that I took during the different presentations. Here's what the judge found. Okay. Now, I will say I have seen one. WTOP.com was the only media site that I found that actually gave a fairly accurate description of what happened in the courtroom. And they were there, and the NBC was there, and CBS was there, and ABC was there. The cameras were outside. And of course, that was interesting to watch, because they had it all arranged. It was raining, but they had about 25 of these demonstrators outside the courtroom. And right on cue, when they start to roll the cameras, everybody starts to do the chant, ah, yeah, 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 yeah. But then once the cameras were off, they stopped their chanting, packed up, and left. So it was manufactured sound bites right in front of the courthouse. So, as artificial as it gets. But anyway, we're running a little bit long. One of the things that the judge found was, broadly, he found that there was a lot that he was not going to rule on Friday, that he had to do some more research. There were some other issues that were brought up, some other precedents that were brought up. So he wanted to do some more research. Long story short, he upheld the injunction that he put in place originally to prevent the city from removing statues. He sustained the action itself, which means it will go to trial. He found that that one of the motions was to change the name of Jackson Park, and he found, because of the fact that in the original offer and acceptance of the property from the donator to the city, one of the conditions was that it would remain named Jackson Park, and so he did find that Jackson Park's name survives. That would not be changed. Unfortunately, Lee Park did not survive. That will remain being Emancipation Park. One of the most important things about this whole case, and this is where Hal talked about today, is tying criminal culpability here, beyond the civil side. So this is a civil action. However, they have attempted to make the nexus with Virginia State Criminal Code. Now, the judge held that for further hearing. He took that all under advisement, which means that they call it ultra vires. Under color of authority is what you hear most people refer to it as, but ultra vires means outside the law. So that's one of the allegations against the city council, is that they unlawfully are attempting to remove these statues. And there is a criminal section in Virginia law that would apply to them in that case if they are found to have done so. And the fact is that the real argument now is is this law applicable to these statues? So I won't go into any more detail than that. It gets too complicated, but it's an ongoing process. And if you're interested in this, and I think you should be, because Gigi's Boo, you there?
Yeah.
What is really going on with all this attack on these parks and statues? What's really going on with that?
One thing I think is they're trying to erase history. One thing. A lot of people, I hate people who feel like they're entitled. The entitlement people. If they can wipe away this, if they can get this stopped that they're doing now, because it represents the Civil War. The Civil War was not fought over slavery. If you do your history, you can see. If they wipe this out, the next thing they're going to come for, and I've heard this already, that some of the Catholic churches already are taking down the statues of Mary and Jesus and the saints. Okay, they're going to try to wipe out and remain their history, their time. That's what they're going to do. That's my belief. Plus, one other thing, if they're doing this, you're going to pay attention to it, and you're not going to pay attention to what's really going on. Let me give you a little bit of example. Everybody in the United States does not need to be divided. Two things happened within about a 2-week span that brought unity. One was the solar eclipse. For 2 minutes and 38 seconds, there was no race, no politics, no hate, anything, because all eyes were up looking at the solar eclipse. No sooner did we have that till we had the tragedy in Texas. I was really affected by that tragedy down there, and I watched Fox News religiously. I will not look at any other news source. Gary screams at me about that, but he and I have different opinions, but we still love each other. I did not see a white man carrying white people, white man picking up white people in a boat, black people doing this, black people doing that. You saw all races and creeds coming together to help their neighbor, to love one another. They were one. There was an older gentleman. Gary, drop that link in there to that video that you did. There was an older gentleman stuck in his pickup truck, and the water was swift. And to save that man's life, blacks, whites, Hispanics, all formed a human chain and held hands and got that man out of that truck, brought him to safety, and he was elderly and weak. And one man picked him up and carried him in his arms. Tell me where the racial divide is there. Tell me where the liberals and the conservatives were there. It was not there. We are brothers and sisters. We all bleed red. Let's put all this aside. Let's put all this hate aside. And as the song said that my mother brought up to me earlier, come on, people, now, let's learn to love one another right now. And that's what Texas has showed us. And that's all I got to say about that.
Yeah, very good. And I'd like to close along these same lines. It's a very short blog piece that I put together. and it's titled Renaming of Jackson Park. Is this rational? It pays to educate oneself. At issue in Charlottesville is the renaming of Thomas Jonathan Stonewall Jackson Park. The reason asserted as the uncomfortable reminder of slavery attendant to the name. If people actually took the time to know Jackson's history, they'd see an unavoidable contradiction. In 1855, Jackson began teaching Sunday school classes to slaves in Lexington, Virginia, which was a violation of Virginia's segregation laws. Slaves came to know him through these classes and sometimes begged him to buy them so they wouldn't be sold into the Deep South, where they might actually be worked to death. In 1906, long after Jackson's death, Reverend L.L. Downing, whose parents had been among the slaves in Jackson's Sunday school, raised money to have a memorial window dedicated to him in the Fifth Avenue Presbyterian Church of Roanoke, Virginia, likely making Stonewall the only Confederate general to have a memorial in an African-American church. And to the great credit of the judge, Jackson Park will remain as such. That's all for us tonight, Gigi the Boo. What do you have?
As I always say, I love you big to my heart. And remember, always take the road less traveled. Good night.
Yeah, good night, all you folks. And there again, thanks again for showing up. And I apologize for, the legal stuff. I know a lot of people, the eyes glass over, but this is some really, really important something that's really important going on here, and I call it like a flashpoint, a ground zero event. And we'll continue to follow it with reallibertymedia.com and the road less traveled. And anyway, we thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again next week. So take care. We'll see you.